Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about inventory basics. Essentially, we're going to be looking at the best ways that you can set up your inventory, starting with the inventory tree. And then we're going to look at how you can best set up individual inventory items and some of the best practices that are associated with that. So let's first start by looking at the inventory tree. If you're a new customer, and if you didn't take advantage of our free inventory import, then your inventory tree will just have one folder that I believe is just called default, and in parentheses will say do not delete. The reason that it says do not delete is because you need at least one inventory folder or inventory group to begin building your inventory tree. And the way that you do this is by right-clicking on the existing folder, and then that will give you the option to go to the Inventory Group Manager. And then from here, you can either add a new inventory group, or you can add a new child group to the group that you right-clicked on. Let's start by adding a new inventory group. I'm just going to call this New Group so it's easy to see. When I click Create, you can see that it's added to my inventory tree. I can now drag and drop this to go anywhere that I want on the list. Some people might do theirs alphabetically. So when I drop it, it will say, are you trying to move it inside of the folder that you dropped it on, or above or below it? Let's say I'm moving it above. So some people might do this alphabetically, but a lot of people will do this more based on how they're building a job. So maybe they want their video to go first, then their audio or computers or whatever. And so when you're in a quote and you start building a quote, if you're in auto sort mode, then all of your items will sort into subtotals that are based on these parent folders. And so I'd say that's what a majority of our customers would do, is organize the inventory groups in a way that they want them to appear on a quote when you're building that quote in auto sort mode. After you've created all of the parent inventory groups that you want, that's when you can start adding the child groups. So for example, under video, I have lenses. I already have a test one that I created here, monitors, projectors, screens, cable, etc. Under audio, amplifiers, speakers, microphones, etc. So to add a new one, I would just right-click on the audio group, go to Inventory Group Manager, and then click Add New Child Group. Always verify that you're in the right parent or child group here. So right now I'm adding a new child group to audio. And then let's say this is something, let's just say accessories or something like that. And just like with the parent groups, I can drag and drop the child groups to add wherever I want. I can move it inside, above, or below whatever I dragged it on top of. And of course, I could add child groups to child groups, just using the same method. I would right-click on the child group, go to Inventory Group Manager, then click Add New Child Group. So essentially, you could have groups and child groups that go 5, 6 different groups deep. Typically, we recommend only going about 2 or 3 groups deep, because a lot of times if you're using this inventory tree to build your jobs, you don't want to have to click through 5 different groups just to get to the item so you can put it on a quote. So just a good rule of thumb is to try to keep your inventory folders to about, I would say, 2 or 3 deep. Another good practice too is that if you have items in a particular inventory group that take up the entire view of your inventory section here in the resource browser, then I would say it's probably time to create a new child group to split up those items. Typically that would probably be somewhere in the 35 to 40 item range. Might be a little bit more or less depending on what the size you're using on your screen, but typically it's probably in that range. So if you have more items than can fit on the page, you might also want to create a new child group and split those items up. Other options that you can use from that inventory group manager. So for example, let's go back to my audio inventory group manager. If I click edit inventory group, this is where I can change the name of the group. I could give this group an icon. We have a large icon library that you could choose from. So maybe for audio, I would just choose, oops, I clicked the wrong one. I would just choose a general speaker icon. The view groups will tell you which security groups can actually look at this folder and the items that are contained within it. So if I were to click only accounting, administrators, and inventory managers can view this group, then only people that belong to those security groups will be able to view this folder. You also have the management group, and this would be typically what will happen is if you have unreturned items on a manifest, and if they're going to be marked as presumed missing, if that item belongs to this group and this security group is the management group, then that security group will get the emails that say this item has been marked presumed missing. So you don't have to have a management group here, but some people do like to include that so that that security group will also get the presumed missing emails. The sales account and purchase account has to do more with your QuickBooks integration, and if you want items from this inventory group to go into a certain GL account in your system, in your QuickBooks, then you can set that up here. And the lighting attributes has more to do with, this is kind of a Easter egg feature, that if you set this to yes, then there are some other settings in the system that you could set up where it will help you calculate what the power needs will be for your lighting equipment. So we would have that as no for audio since this is not lighting equipment. We're not necessarily going to look at how to set that up in this webinar, but that's what that feature is. So any changes I've made, I would click Update. You can see that the icon has changed. And then I could do the same thing for each child group. Go to Inventory Group Manager, Edit Inventory Group, change any information here. I could change the icon, maybe find something that looks like an amplifier, then click Update. Typically, I personally like just the straight blue folders, but a lot of people do set up these icons just in a way that makes it easier for people to look at the icon real quick and know exactly which folder they're going into. The other options that you have when you right-click on an inventory group, you can delete the inventory group and everything that's in it. You can create a new inventory item, and when you do it from this screen or from that menu, it automatically fills in the primary group with whatever the group was that you were right-clicking on. And you can also look at the inventory group availability for all the items that are directly under this group. And what I mean by that is, look, for example, if I were to do inventory group availability on my audio folder, it's actually not going to show anything because there aren't any inventory items directly underneath the audio folder. But if I were to go to my wired microphones, you can see that there are inventory items directly underneath this folder. So looking at the inventory group availability here, it shows me the availability for each of those items that's directly underneath the folder. So that's how you can set up your inventory tree. If at any time you have a bunch of different folders and subfolders open, you could always click this little refresh icon here, and that will close everything and refresh everything for you. Let's look at creating a new inventory item now and some of the things that you'll want to include and some of the options that there are as you're creating a new inventory item that can help you as you're organizing your Flex system and as you're using some of the other features that Flex offers down the road. So let's say, for example, we want to create a new inventory item in our wired microphones. So I click New Inventory Item. The item name is, of course, not just going to be what this item is called, but keep in mind that whatever you put in this field is going to be exactly as the item name appears on a quote. So when I drag and drop this item onto a quote, this item name will be exactly what will appear on that quote. So a lot of times you want to be a little bit more descriptive. Say, for example, if I'm adding, what do I not have here? Let's say that maybe I'm adding a Shure Beta 91. And if I recall, this is a drum microphone. It's been a while since I've set up a microphone kit on drums, but I think a Beta 91 is a drum mic. So you could be as descriptive as you want on this, depending on how much you want your customers to be able to see when you put this item on a quote. The item short name, on the other hand, that's just how it's going to appear over here in the inventory tree. So a lot of times you can make this a little bit shorter and just something where the people that are building quotes or your warehouse techs, all they need to see is just Shure Beta 91 and they know exactly what that is. They don't need to have the full description of drum, microphone, or whatever else. And then the shorthand this one's kind of a carryover from other inventory control programs that our customers have wanted to continue using the shorthand field. But this is really just basically an easier way that you can search for your different inventory. So for example, I might say the shorthand is just BT91 for Beta 91. So if I'm over here in my search tab and I'm looking for inventory items to add to a quote, I could type in BT91 and that should pull up as one of these search options. The narrative description can just be a longer description of this item. That's totally optional, and just for your information, there's really no other place that this appears in Flex. So you can't necessarily get this to appear on a quote or anywhere else. It's just going to be here. I believe there are some custom reports that you can request from us that would get the narrative description to appear on a PDF, but by default, the narrative description is only available right here. A lot of this other stuff is optional information, but we always encourage you to put as much as you can when you're creating new inventory items, because there are a lot of different reports that you can use in Flex that pull this information. And a lot of times that can be very useful to you depending on the type of report that you're running. So say, for example, if you're crossing borders quite a bit and you need to show customs control a manifest, and they want to know the country of manufacture of the gear that you have, then you can put that information here. And so you would print a manifest that has that information, and each line item or each item that was scanned would show its country of manufacture. And same with just the typical manufacturer field. A lot of this information is just things that you can pull later to make things a little bit easier for you down the road. This one doesn't necessarily have a size, but the size might work for something like cable or things like that. You can also track running hours. A lot of times this has to do with things that have lamps, like lights or projectors. And then every time you scan this item in or out, if track running hours is set to yes, then you can enter how many hours that item ran since the last time it was scanned. Again, I won't necessarily do it for this item because there aren't any real sensitive parts that need to be replaced or kept track of time-wise. Again, this is typically more for like projectors, lights, things with lamps and things like that. You can enter a replacement and a purchase cost. A lot of times these will just be the same. I don't know exactly how much this mic would be, but that's just a good estimate. And then again, the primary group auto-filled with whatever I right-clicked on. If you just go to the inventory menu and click New Inventory Item, then you would have to choose a primary group. You just click on the pencil icon, highlight a group that you want to put it in, then click Accept. But mine auto-filled, so we'll just leave it at that. And you can also add it to additional groups. A lot of times you might do this for your cable. So for example, if you have some 3-pin XLR cable, you might put it into your audio cable folder. You might also put it into your lighting cable folder, because sometimes different departments might share the same exact item. So it would still be the same item. The quantity counts would still come from just this one item, but you could either choose it from your audio folder or your lighting folder or whatever. So I typically recommend putting your primary group as the one that it's going to be used the most in, and then the additional groups being any other group it could possibly be used in. Just like your inventory group folders, you can add an icon. And I think we actually have an icon that kind of looks like one of these Beta 91 mics. Or I might be mistaken. I think the one I'm thinking of is a 98, if I'm remembering right now. I'm just searching that in my other window now. I think it is a Beta 98. I just wanted to make sure I was right on that. I think the Beta 91 is a kick drum mic. Okay, so you could add that icon. We already talked about country of manufacturer. You can hide this item as well. This works just like the security groups that can view a certain inventory folder. I can hide just a specific item as well. And then there's a permission in the security groups that says, can a person view and search for hidden items, yes or no? So even if this item is hidden, if somebody has the permission to view and search for hidden items, they'll still be able to see it. You can also choose whether or not this is line muted by default. So if I add that to a quote, is it automatically going to line mute it, yes or no? And that might just depend on if this is an item that you never want the customer to see on their PDF copy. That's what line muting will do. Of course, even if this is line muted by default, yes, I could always just uncheck it so it's not line muted after I add it to the quote. We're not going to look too much at the structure and availability just because that would be its own webinar. In fact, I did a series of webinars on structure and availability just over the past couple months. So I would recommend going and finding those webinars on our YouTube page. All we're going to talk about here is you can either set up this item as non-serialized or as serialized. The difference being, if I set this up as non-serialized, Flex is just going to generate one single barcode, and that's the barcode I'm going to use to scan these items in and out. And when I scan them out, I would enter a quantity. I would say I'm scanning out 10 of these, and that would be the end of it. Whereas if I were to set up this item as serialized, then that means that each individual microphone gets its own unique barcode. And so if I'm scanning 10 out, I would have to scan 10 individual barcodes that are affixed to that microphone somehow. And again, this is usually the recommendation I give. There's no wrong or right way to set it up. You don't need a serial number on the item to track it as serialized. All serialized means is that each individual unit gets its own barcode. So we have some customers that serialize their cable, for example, and they put an individual barcode on each and every one of their cables. Cables don't have a serial number, but that doesn't matter. You could still set it up as serialized, just meaning each unit gets its own barcode. But then other people might set up their cable as non-serialized because they have hundreds and hundreds of cables and they don't want to have to scan each and every one. If it were set up as non-serialized, they would just enter one barcode and say, I'm scanning out 50 of these, and then that would scan out a quantity of 50. Again, though, because this is a microphone that's relatively expensive, I probably want to track each one individually. So I'm going to say tracked by serial number, yes, to make it a serialized model so that each microphone gets its own barcode. If this were an item that maybe I don't expect to come back, like batteries, gaff tape, and other things, I could set it as expendable. If I set this expendable to yes, then by default, the way that Flex is set up to work is that when I add that item to a quote, it automatically adds it as a retail resource type instead of rental. And you can also enter a return estimate, and this would just work for a manifest. So if I scan out 100 batteries, but then say that the return estimate for my batteries is 50%, the manifest would expect that I might be returning about half of those batteries. And then since it's just more for tracking information, I could enter a part number, SKU, just so if I'm ordering this item frequently, then I have that information here readily available. The barcode is going to be automatically generated by Flex. So I'm going to leave that blank. And the barcode label field is more of an advanced feature for barcode label printing. The last couple things we'll look at for logistics, you can enter a weight for this item. This is probably only about a pound. And you can enter dimensions. This one would be difficult for me to do, so I'll just leave that blank. But for cases and things like that, you definitely might want to enter the dimensions in your choice of linear unit. And again, a lot of these things you would set up now just because down the road you can print pull sheet and manifest reports that show you the entire weight. It will take all of the items on that manifest, look at the weight for each of those items, and give you a total. So that could be very useful for you for your shipping manifest, especially if you are going through weigh stations and things like that. And then the prep time is also something that you can use. There's a certain token field that you can use, like on a calendar, to say it's going to take every single item on a quote or on a pull sheet, take the prep time for each of those items, and give you a total prep time. A lot of times this might be a little difficult to use because it's going to require you to do it in minutes. And honestly, I don't think a single one of these microphones is going to take 1 minute to prep. So some items you might leave as just nothing. Some items that take longer to prep, you might want to put 5-10 minutes in there. Again, these are all optional. You don't have to use them. They're just things that you can use and print out reports or see that information elsewhere in Flex. And lastly, the notes field. Anytime I add this item to a quote, I could say whether or not it wants to automatically add a note. So a lot of times this might be useful if you have an item that has some small parts that you want to double check before you send it out. In fact, this might be a great example. I would say verify that the clip is in the bag. Because I wouldn't necessarily make a separate inventory item just for the clip. That's just part of this microphone. But a lot of times the clip might get taken off and not get put back in the bag. So that might be a great note that you would put anytime this gets added to a quote, and then this note would push down to the pull sheet as well so that your warehouse guys can see that note to verify the clip is in the bag. And if that's something that you don't want the customer to see, then you can note mute it by default. So even if you add this to a quote, this note will still appear, but it will be note muted so it won't show up on the PDF copy that the customer sees. Okay, so we've covered all the different options that you can input as you're adding inventory. Again, I recommend filling out as much as possible, but technically all you need is a name, a group, and a preset. But I usually will tell people don't get lazy when you're adding your items, because down the road you might realize that, oh, I wanted to put replacement and purchase costs in all of my items so I could print a report saying what is the entire replacement cost for this job. Same with the weight units and things like that. I'll add this item, but even after I've created it, of course, I can edit that, change all that information. And a lot of you might be thinking, well, now I want to add weight units or I want to add replacement costs, but I don't want to click into every single one of my inventory items and have to do that. A really quick and easy way that you can do this is go to your inventory menu, then click Catalog Worksheet, and this will show you all of the different inventory models in your system. And I could click all to show all on one page. And it's also going to show me information like length, width, height, weight, etc. And all of these fields can be edited directly from this page. So say, for example, it looks like I put a weight in here, but I forgot to put a weight unit on this stage deck. So I could just choose from here pound, and that automatically saves. Same with purchase or replacement costs. I could just click right into the field here, change that value, and it automatically saves. And then furthermore, I can even go over here and change the pricing that I'm charging the customer. So my day rate for this Apple MacBook 13-inch, I can come over here and change what I'm charging for that item. And again, everything automatically saves. So again, that's your inventory menu catalog worksheet, where you can change a lot of that information from one screen without having to open each individual inventory item. Just a couple of the options that you can use after you've created the inventory item. You can upload an image, either take one with a webcam or use a saved picture. If you've set up the item as serialized, you'll have a serial numbers tab, and this is where you're going to add each unit that you own. So if I own 10 of these, then I can either one by one add each unit. If they have serial numbers, I would enter it here. The barcode would automatically generate. Just make sure I'm adding it to the right location, the right resource type, which is typically will be rental. You can also add a purchase date, purchase order number if you want, and the purchase cost, if you click into this field, will automatically generate with the purchase cost that you set up for the model. So I'll click add, and now I have a unique barcode for this serial number. I can go in and enter my next serial number, click add, and then from here I can even select these items, and if you've set up a barcode printer with your system, you can print the serial unit barcodes so that you could put those barcodes right onto these items. A lot of these other options we do cover in other webinars, and you can find those on our YouTube page, like suggestions, how to set those up, alternatives and substitutions, setting up default suppliers like purchase and subrental suppliers, pricing and things like that, and also some of these other tabs as well. So we won't go into detail on those, but I really just wanted to show in this webinar just some of the basics, how you're setting up your inventory, all the different options that you can set up as you are entering that information. I'm noticing too that I didn't update my shorthand field here, so I would do that now. There are quite a few options over here in the workbench menu that you can choose from. And then again, you can change a lot of the information about your inventory models from the catalog worksheet. And you can also utilize the inventory manager. And this will just show you all of the different inventory models, and you can include serial units if you want. And it will show you the information about that, like its current location, if it's in a container, and things like that. Again, I always recommend don't get lazy when you're adding inventory to your system, because now I have access to a lot of this information. For example, there are some reports that I can print. Say, for example, if we're looking at our inventory count report, I can include the cost, yes or no, And if I didn't have costs in these fields, then that information would just be blank and would essentially be useless to me. And then from a pull sheet or a manifest, I could open any of these and print reports that have a lot of that weight information, shipping information, country manufacturer, and things like that. Different reports have different information, so I recommend going through and clicking through some of the available reports and seeing if it has the information that you want. So we won't go any further than that. If you want to learn more about the structure and availability settings, again, you can find those webinars on our YouTube page. Same with all the other options, all the different tab options that we have here. And we also have some inventory best practices videos on the YouTube page as well, where you can learn some of the best ways to set up your inventory. Right now, we pretty much just focused on what each field means, but we have some videos that will tell you what we found to be some of the best ways to set up your inventory, and also some recommendations that we've gotten from customers. If you have any questions about setting up your inventory, feel free to head over to our forum. Click the webinars board and you can find the specific topic for this webinar where you can ask questions there. We also have a board that's set up specifically for inventory where you can ask questions and find a lot of good information there. If you have any questions that are more technical in nature, we ask that you email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.